Hello, my name's Craig Hamilton Parker, and together with my wife Jane, we go around the world on mystical journeys, giving proof of life after death through our mediumship. We do this in theatres, at conferences, and a great deal of work on television as well. We do all our work nowadays for free, and you'll find out why we do that at the end of this video. Okay, today I've got my Donald Trump hat on. In fact, it doesn't have Trump written on it, but you know what we're going on about here. This is my Donald Trump hat. And I'm wearing it today because the topic I'm going to talk about today is the ego. Not saying that Donald Trump or anyone like him has an ego, but you know, there we go, there's a disclaimer. The ego, what is it, you know? Now, I see a lot of people arguing on Facebook and places about, oh, you've got a big ego and all the rest of it, and you know, and then there's other people spiritually saying, you know, oh, you must get rid of the ego completely. What do we mean by the ego? That three-letter word causes so much confusion. So, on the one sense, let's think about it. It's a person's sense of self-esteem and self-importance. We understand it in the normal sense, don't we? It's people taking themselves too seriously, thinking, you know, I'm a really important person. You know, I'm great. I'm Craig Hamilton Parker. I'm a medium. I'm marvellous, aren't I? You know, and it's that sense of self-importance, the boost to the ego, as we might say. You know, and sometimes we think, oh, it's good to have a bit of a boost to the ego. I feel a bit more confident. So we kind of associate it with a confidence, but a sort of a false confidence, really, isn't it? A sort of false confidence. And then, you know, then other people start talking about the ego, and what they're really talking about sometimes is what Freud understood the ego to be in his psychoanalysis. It's that part of the mind that mediates between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. You know, it's sort of responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. You know, it's our sense of self. Freud conceives the ego to be some construct of the brain that gives it. So he's really identifying there the idea of the ego with the idea of the I. You know, I am is kind of the ego there, the self. And then there's a philosophical sense of the ego we could talk about, which is the sort of the metaphysical sense of the ego, which is really, I suppose, the conscious being, the conscious person. I suppose in there's a name for it in Sanskrit. There's the jiva, of course, which is like the self, there's the soul, but that's not quite, I don't know quite remember the Vedic name for it. But anyway, there's different ways of defining this thing. So I'm kind of, I suppose, talking today about the ego that makes us all feel so self-important, you know. People worry about what people think about them. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I better take this hat off, it's doing something to the camera. There, that's better. Me. Now the ego we all have, you know. Craig Hamilton Parker, he's the great medium, he's a marvellous speaker, he's a great spiritual person, you know. I could be getting myself in serious trouble there, couldn't I? And there's lots of people that all think the same. We all have a self-image of ourselves, you know. So there's that part of ourselves that we think about as being, perhaps we confuse it with the idea, we think that's the real me, you know. Someone's bruised your ego, you feel real bad about it, you know, because you've put all your faith in that ego. What SKYPE called the monkey mind, you know, that part of ourselves that's just like a mate that's all the time pestering you. You start trying to be good and do nice things, and that ego mind says, no, do this, do that, you're better than that, you know. So there's this egotistical part of ourselves that almost is us, but at the same time it's not us, because we know it's something that's misbehaving, like a monkey, like a mad monkey that's running around us all the time, you know. And that ego causes us a lot of trouble, you know. I mean, all these people that are in power at the moment in the world, you know, the presidents and the dictators and the politicians, the prime ministers and all the rest of them, male and female, they're all on sort of a huge ego trip because they're interested in power. you know. When it comes to money, you can earn up to about, but they say that after about £75,000 annual income, a person generally is a bit satiated with money. They don't really need a lot more to be happy, because it'll buy your car, your house, your basic good lifestyle. I mean, people probably think they need more than that and think that's an enormous amount. But after that, money just becomes sort of a bit irrelevant, because you can buy anything you want. So what they get hooked on next is power. So the big fat cats in industry, they're not just interested in these multi-million wages and all the rest of it. They want the power that goes with it. They want that feeling that I am better than other people, you know. I have money, you know. Who are you? You don't earn anything. You just on a normal way. You're a psychic. My God, scumbags, you know. No interest in if a person's doing spiritual work or anything like that. You know, they so many get lost in it. Hollywood too, doesn't it? Really, just often huge. They're what? Hollywood. They're what? They're saying let's pretend. You know, let's pretend, and they play let's pretend at school, you know, and then they start doing it as adults, and then they start thinking they really are that person. This is again the ego, but in a different way. This time I'd say that ego was more like a persona, they used to call it in the Greek plays, which was like a mask that you put on your face, and that persona that you put on, that mask you put on, you become like the man in the iron mask. You can't get the thing off, and you start to think you are that person that you've been play acting. Then you look behind that persona, look behind that kind of ego of that person, and sometimes with Hollywood actors and great big stars and all famous people, you know, you find that there's quite a weak person underneath it, you know. I mean, Jane and I have been lucky. We've spoken to quite a lot of nice people in the celebrity world, you know, with some really nice ones. And when you talk to them on a bit more of a human level, you find that they're no different to you and me. They got just the same worries and fears, but they get through it. And I don't think you could get through it in Hollywood without an ego, but they get through it by putting on this ego, this persona. And the danger is they get lost in it and they forget who the real person is. You know, they forget themselves. I often think the best way to find out who you are is to think about who you are when you were a child, or to look at a picture of someone when they were a child. You can see there the person before the ego got a big grip, can't you? You can see who the real person is and get a better understanding of who they are. And I think, you know, if we can find that childish, I should say, not just childlike, childish part of ourselves, I think, you know, it helps to get rid of that ego that gets in the way. Because, you know, it's a huge sacrifice having an ego. You might feel a bit more confident having an ego and getting one over on other people. But actually what it does, it separates you, because instead of thinking, you know, you've got this huge great lumbering ego that you're carrying around with you, you know, which is of no good to anybody, and everybody thinks you're a bloody fool anyway if you're egotistical. Most people would see through it. But the reality is, if we could think of ourselves, instead of thinking of the ego, think how small we are. You know, that we're just like one grain of sand on a vast beach. You know, when you look at the scale of the universe, you think, my God, I'm so unimportant. And yet, at the same time, I'm massively important because I can see all this, you know. And that's much better, isn't it? To get away from that big ego trip and get onto the really big ego trip is to see yourself as a God-realised person. That you're not just this silly little tiny S with a small s, but S with a big S self, you know. You're huge. I mean, some of the great teachers said that there's no such thing as the I, you know, because often we think of the I, that, you know, going back to the metaphysical idea now, that the ego is the sort of the centre of our conscious thinking, the subject, as it were, the I. Some say there's no such thing. I mean, Ramana Maharishi, Ramana Maharishi, I always get his name at the end wrong. He was a man that went into deep meditation and so forth, and his conclusion was that you all have to do is ask yourself the question, who am I? And you keep asking that question and start looking, and you finally find that there's no such thing as that I, you know. You know, anything I'm experiencing is not me. Any thought I'm having is not me because I'm having that thought. This feeling is not me because I'm aware of having that feeling. I'm aware of being aware, and so on. I'm aware of being aware of being aware of being aware. So it goes on and on and on and on and on. And actually, his conclusion was that there's no such thing as the I. I mean, the Buddha said there's a very similar thing, because he said that the self is empty of inherent existence. You're not there, mate. You're gone. I do not exist, you know. So it gets all very confusing, I think, for people when they first look at this topic. But I think the first step is really to sort of negate that I a little bit more. You know, if we start feeding the egotistical side of ourselves, we lose track of who we really are. We lose track with that child within. We lose track with that real self, the real person we are. So we're mugs, you know, when we get on ego trips. But we all do it. I do it. All of us do it. We all fall victim to that. You know, when we get angry or anything like that, that's an ego trip. You know, when we get jealous, that's an ego trip. You know, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. You know. So the way to get rid of it, I think, is to follow in some respects what they said in the Bhagavad Gita, which I thought that I found quite inspiring, because I've been reading that again recently. And Krishna said that give up the fruits. Give up the fruits of everything you do. So all this work we do it and think, oh, we'll get some good karma from this. You know, well, I'll be in the spirit world forever, you know, because I'm developing good karma from doing all these good deeds, you know. Because when you start doing good deeds with this self-righteous state of mind, you know, you're sort of becoming really quite a cripple inside, because, you know, you're doing it for your own egotistical reasons. So, you know, got to get that out your mind. So the only way that Krishna said to Arjuna to get round this is, you know, give up the fruits. You know, just do it for its own sake. Do it like a person, like art for art's sake. You know, when you paint a painting, you don't think, oh, I'm going to be in a gallery with this. You know, no, you do it because you love it. You know, or if you play music, if you're a real musician, you'll play the music and just love it. You know, and you'll do it. You pay people to allow you to do it. You know. So, you know, it's a bit like that falling in love with the world, really, because that's what happens when I think you give up the fruits. You become part of what in the Vedic idea is prema, you know, which really means love, but it's more than that. It's like divine love, because love is like a surrender. It's a giving up. It's a letting go. It's a throwing away of the ego. You know, as soon as you get married, you realise the first thing under threat is going to be your ego, isn't it? You know. And in all respects, you know, and when you fall in love, you give up your ego because you're not so concerned about yourself. You'd sacrifice yourself for the person you love, wouldn't you? You sacrifice yourself for your children. If a car was coming along and you had to get them out the way, you throw them out the way and take the blow yourself. Most mothers would, most fathers would, you know, because you find that there's something bigger than the self, than you, something more important than you. So, you know, that's the way to happiness, isn't it? If we tie ourselves up in all this egotistical nonsense, these power games, this need for money, this need for fame, this need for self-importance, this need to be better than your neighbour, you know, and instead if we just see ourselves, like I said, like that little grain of sand on a beach, and there's just one of an infinite sea of selves, and see how small our self is, and maybe even consider that the self might not even be there in the first place. You know, it might fade away in the essence of time when we join the great light of divinity. You know, and we join that great prema, that great love of infinity. Then the ego isn't that important. That's it. You can go now. Jane and I now do our spiritual work for our foundation. All the profits that come from things like our conferences and theatres and workshops and all those exciting things now go into this foundation, which ultimately has the long-term plan of building centres in the UK and maybe around the world one day. But meanwhile, we've been doing a lot of direct spiritual work with it. We've been going out, feeding people in India, giving to the destitute, giving to beggars. We've helped feed schools, helped orphanages, and we've even given cows to older people that have no other form of income. So mediumship can change your life, but it can also help people directly in the world. So go to the links at the end and find out all about what Jane and I are trying to do. And you can do a lot just by sharing these videos on social media. Help us get the word out. Help us to do something really good in this world.